Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 Season 30 video on the best builds. In this video, we're going to take a look at the top 10 best builds that you can play in Diablo 3 Season 30 for solo Greater Rift pushing. And we're going to group about 70 of the top builds in this game into a tier list of their relative power. This video is brought to you in collaboration with the Diablo 3 experts over at maxroll.gg, who combine their brain power, play experience, and the power of math to figure out what the best builds of Season 30 will be. So let's dive right into the tier list here and put up the Season 29 tier list to compare what has changed. As a refresher, our tiers are measured in terms of relative power compared to S tier, S tier being the best builds in the game. S tier builds are expected to be topping the leaderboards by the end of season. The key here again is relative power. If you personally can clear a GR 100 with a B tier build, then that means you should be able to clear a GR 110 with an S tier build. Now, Season 30 is doing a number of things that are shaking up the meta and actually bringing the game into possibly the best state of balance it's ever been in. First, it's adding in a nerfed version of the Season 28 Altar of Rights. This will permanently be a part of every season going forward now, and this is a power boost to all characters. However, some builds will benefit a little bit more than others. Second, for this season theme, it's reintroducing the Season 25 Soul Shards. This is a huge power buff, and again, some builds do benefit more than others. So these two factors will be partially responsible for the rises and falls that we're going to see this season in the tier list, but another reason is the massive balance patch that has come with this season. It feels like this is the one patch to finalize the state of Diablo 3. And lastly, Season 29 had a Paragon cap, which prevented some builds from achieving their true power. So now that Paragon is uncapped again, we're going to see some of those suppressed builds rising once more. So altogether, this adds up to a lot of movement on our tier list this season. Now, as a reminder, when you see a red arrow on the tier list, that is a build that has dropped one tier. A green arrow means it rose a tier. 2 arrows means movement of at least 2 tiers. A little gray asterisk means that that build uses the Hadrig's gift set. That's a starter set that you can earn via the season journey. Later in the video, we'll also cover which classes get the best starter sets. We're going to rank them in order. So let's dive now into the Season 30 tier list, beginning with the F tier. F as in faded away like dust in the wind. Yes, last season we had just one build left in F tier, and it has now risen, meaning we don't even have an F tier anymore. I mean, yes, technically we can find more suboptimal builds to add and put into the F tier, but why? We already have about 70 builds in the game now that fit between S and D tier. That gives you plenty of things to choose from before needing to resort to even worse builds. So let's move straight to the D tier, D as in destitute. D tier builds are up to 20 Greater Rifts behind S tier, and there's barely any left. We have the Legacy of Dreams Skeletal Mage Necro, aka the Rat Mage. This is ascended from F tier thanks to the Dregs of Lies Soul Shard buffing pet damage, and the Sliver of Terror giving you buffs based on how many skills you have on cooldown, which will be 4 at pretty much all times, so together this adds up to a rise in tier. Then the Tal Rasha Frozen Orb Wizard remains in the D tier, despite a massive nerf to the Tal Rasha set. Because of Sliver of Terror, it has this Ring of Fire that just does so much damage that it elevates even weaker builds. But this is not the strongest Tal Rasha build, and it also isn't the strongest Frozen Orb build. That takes us to the C tier. C as in, can't blame you for skipping this tier. C tier builds are up to 15 Greater Rifts behind the S tier, and for multiple reasons, you're just generally better off picking other builds. We have the Arakir Firebat's Witch Doctor, which isn't the strongest Arakir build. It's also not even the strongest Firebats build, technically. I think Helltooth is stronger. We don't have it separately on the list, but if you're going to go Firebats, you might as well go Helltooth, but if you're going Helltooth, you might as well not go Firebats. Arguably, Helltooth Firebats can reach B tier. Then the Legacy of Dreams Rapid Fire Demon Hunter rises from D tier, and it's the weakest Demon Hunter build we have on the list. To channel Rapid Fire, you gotta be a sitting duck, which really puts you at risk. However, this build likely will top the no-set leaderboard for Demon Hunter. And that takes us to the B tier, B as in barely anything left in this tier. More than we've seen, but last season, most builds were B tier builds. But again, thanks to the balancing efforts of the D3 team, most builds will now be A tier this season, which is a fantastic state of balance. B tier builds are up to 10 Greater Rifts behind S tier. For the Barbarian, we have 2 Immortal King builds. The Charge Barb, which also works in some of the Rhykker set, And this scales damage based on move speed, so thanks to the Altar of Rites and the Shard of Anguish, we're able to stack more move speed than ever, so it's rising up from D tier. Then the Immortal King Hammer of the Ancients Barb remains comfortably within B tier. It's the weaker variant of Hammer of the Ancients that you can run. For the Monk, the Uliana Exploding Palm build, the Sunmuko Lashing Tailkick build, and the Sunmuko Wave of Light all remain within B tier. Uliana did receive a nice balance buff, but it wasn't enough to make it rise to tier. As for Sunmuko, there's a better Sunmuko build, also a better Wave of Light build, but if you really want to be Chuck Norris and roundhouse kick the heck out of your enemies, this is the best Lashing Tailkick build that you can run. Then for the Witch Doctor, Arcthorin got hit with the Nerf Bat this season. It's doing half the damage it used to. And the Chicken Dock overall feels this the hardest, so it's dropping down from A tier. Then the Legacy of Dreams Spirit Barrage build rises from C tier, but there is a better Spirit Barrage build, and this also won't be the build to top the Witch Doctor's no-set leaderboard. Helltooth Gargantuan soars up from D tier thanks to a massive rebalancing buff that makes Helltooth do more than double the damage it used to. Combine that with the power of the Dregs of Lies Soul Shard, which buffs pets, and we are leaping up here. But this is still not the best Helltooth build. For the Wizard, we got two builds that use the starter set for the season, Delzier's Magnum Opus. We got Twister and we got Frozen Orb. The DMO set got a sizable balance buff this season, which allows the Frozen Orb variant to rise up to B tier, but the Twisted Sword got a nerf, preventing the DMO Twister build from rising to A tier. Twister will likely top the DMO leaderboards, but it's going to be close. However, we do have a stronger Twister build than this. We also have Legacy of Dreams Frozen Orb in here, which is arguably the best Frozen Orb build, but it's not going to be topping the no-set leaderboards for Wizard. For the Demon Hunter, the Gears of the Dreadlands Hungering Arrow build remains in B tier. It's a top build for speedrunning, but it falls behind in Greater Rift pushing. For the Crusader, the Blessed Hammer build rises thanks to a buff to the Faithful Memory support item. This allows you to maintain better uptime on its maximum damage buff. For the Necromancer, the Pestilence Corpse Lance build soars up from D tier thanks to massive buffs to the Pestilence set. Pestilence set doing now double damage, and also the Corpse Whisper Pauldron support item, another buff that's making that do more than double damage. So Pestilence has been left behind for many seasons. Now these buffs are huge for it. And that takes us into the A tier. A as in, aha, this is where all the builds have been hiding. These builds are only 5 Greater Rifts behind S tier. Just because they are in S tier doesn't mean they are trash. There's a lot of fun and powerful builds in here. I'm going with an A tier build this season. It's a great state of the game when most builds are not far behind S tier. Some of these builds have slipped up into A tier not because they got buffed more than the average, or they're benefiting more than average from the altar and the shards, but just because the top S tier builds were nerfed. This has lowered the overall ceiling, which allows more builds to reach closer to the top, if that top is now lower. For the Barbarian, we got 2 Might of the Earth builds rising from C tier to A tier thanks to the combination of a buff that doubles the damage of the set, as well as soul shards that benefit cooldown reduction and give you buffs based on how many skills you currently have on cooldown. And these builds keep between 4 and 5 skills on cooldown. The Leapquake variant of Might of the Earth is all about humping around, stomping on enemies, causing earthquakes, and it's the earthquakes that are the ones doing the damage, whereas the Seismic Slam variant, bit more active, it's you slamming to deal the damage. But I do believe Leapquake will squeeze out on top on the leaderboards, but it's going to be close. The Savage Frenzy build rises from B tier thanks to the Sliver of Terror granting attack speed buffs, and the Remnant of Pain granting attack speed buffs and cold damage buffs. Frenzy is a cold build, and it is all about attack speed. For the Demon Hunter, we have the Shadow Impale build rocket up from the C tier thanks to a near doubling of its damage, thanks to the balance changes, and the Remnant of Pain buffing cold builds. The Marauder Sentry build remains in A tier, despite benefiting tremendously from the Soul Shards due to a nerf to the Marauder set. Then the 2 Unhallowed Essence builds, Multi-Shot and Hungering Arrow, they rise to tier because they benefit from the Altar of Rites more than average. And they were also suppressed more than average last season from the Paragon. To push high in the Greater Rifts, Unhallowed Essence really needs a lot of Paragon to stack up toughness. Multi-Shot will likely beat Hungering Arrow on the leaderboards. For the Necromancer, 2 Inarius builds rise a tier thanks to a doubling of the Inarius damage buff. We got Poison Scythe and Corpse Explosion. The Inarius set is basically just a vehicle to run whatever build you want to run. However, neither of these are Inarius's final form. There's a better Inarius build out there. There are also Legacy of Dreams versions of both of these builds, the Poison Zaeith and Corpse Explosion. The Corpse Explosion one is actually dropping from S tier due to a nerf to the Grasps of Essence supporting item. And the Poison Zaeith build is rising due to being able to stack more offensive items thanks to the Altar of Rites, granting support benefits that you previously had to sacrifice item slots to get. However, neither of these two will be topping the no-set leaderboard for Necros. We also have the Rathma Army of the Dead build, which remains in A tier. For the Wizard, we got two Firebird builds, Explosive Blast and Flame Blades. Flame Blades really benefits from that increased attack speed from the Soul Shards, and so it's rising a tier. We also have two Veer builds, the classic Chantoto build and the reverse Archon Frozen Orb build. The Frozen Orb one rises from B tier because it really benefits from the altar. It's able to stack more offensive rolls because it can offset cooldown onto the altar. The Chantoto version rises from B tier because of an above average benefit from the Soul Shards. On the leaderboards, it's going to be incredibly close between these two. We also have the Typhon Hydra build remaining in A tier, and then two Legacy of Dreams builds, Twister and Hydra. Twister build was nerfed again because we mentioned that nerf to the Twisted Sword, but it manages to hang on to A tier again because the requirements to hit A tier, they're not as high this season. For the same reason, the Legacy of Dreams Hydra build rises into A tier. For the Witch Doctor, the Mundanugu build got a bit of a nerf this season, along with the Balance Pass, but it remains in A tier. The Arakir Spiders build got heavily nerfed, but because of an above average benefit from the Soul Shards and the Altar of Rites, it does not drop a tier. The Helltooth Zombie Bears builds rises from B tier thanks to that massive Helltooth buff, and this will be the build topping the Helltooth leaderboards. The Jade Harvester build wins big this season. Finally, some love to Jade. It flies up from C tier thanks to getting a massive buff to its 6-piece damage bonus, being able to do more than double damage now. Then the Legacy of Dreams Poison Dart build, which is a pet build, benefits tremendously from the Dregs of Lies and rises up to A tier. And this will be the one topping the Witch Doctor's no-set leaderboards. It is not, however, the best Poison Dart build. Spoilers. For the Crusader, the Roland's Legacy set gets a massive buff this patch. It deals more than double damage now, and it's just great to see this old classic soar again. Two Aegis of Valor Crusader builds are in A tier, despite a 25% nerf to the Aegis of Valor set. The Fist of the Heavens build remains in A tier, while the Heaven's Fury build rises from B tier, because we can once again use this build's most powerful variant now that Paragon is uncapped. We previously had to run the low Paragon variant, which just did not have as much damage output. We needed the survivability for it. For the Monk, the Raymond set got a buff, leading it to rise up to A tier. The Sunwuko Tempest Rush build rises because, in general, Tempest Rush was a big winner with the Soul Shards. So this will be the best Sunwuko build. This Tempest Rush will be topping the Sunwuko leaderboards. And the Inna Mystic Ally build remains in A tier. Solid build. All right, and that takes us into the S tier. S as in salivate over how many top builds are now in this game. I think this is possibly our biggest S tier ever? I'd have to go back every season, but it's possibly our biggest S tier ever. We have so many builds in S tier that our top 10 recommended builds are all selected from S tier, and we have leftover extra builds in S tier. So, the Necromancer's Bone Spear build using the Masquerade set continues to be a top build, despite getting a significant balance nerf. It's easy to gear for, it's one of the rare Necro builds that isn't dependent on managing big cooldowns. Very nice, very fun build to play. The Monk's Legacy of Dreams Wave of Light build continues to dominate. Unlocking Paragon allows it to rise up once again into S tier. And a buff to Kiroshiro's Blade makes it easier than ever to finish off straggling monsters. This build will top the Monk's no-set leaderboards. It's also an amazing speed build, but this build is very gear dependent. It's very difficult to gear, and you really gotta ramp up your Paragons for it to reach its final form. The Crusader's Legacy of Nightmares Bombardment build, aka the Lawn Bomb build, rises back into S tier. This is a Thorns build, and Thorns doesn't typically crit, but the Remnant of Pain Soul Shard will transform attacks against incapacitated enemies into automatic crits, thereby allowing Thorns to crit and unlocking the ability to stack a ton more damage. This is another build that's difficult to gear, however, but it can be super tanky, and it's an amazing speed farming build as well. Alright, that takes us into our top 10 best, most recommended builds for Season 30. And we got at least one build for every class in here. We're going to start at number 10, the best Monk build of Season 30, the Patterns of Justice Tempest Rush Monk. This build soars up from B tier, thanks to the Tempest Rush builds benefiting tremendously from the soul shards. It squeezes its way from the top of B tier all the way to the bottom of S tier. This build is great at most content in the game. It does struggle to keep momentum going, however, when you don't have too many enemies on screen. That takes us to number 9, the Crusader build that will top the no-set leaderboards. The Legacy of Dreams Blessed Shield Crusader, aka the Captain America build. Here's another build that comes flying up from B tier thanks to a massive buff to Akon's Manacles, or as I call them, the Matthew Mechanicals. This build has always been really fun to play. You just toss out your shield like your Captain America, it's simple, it's tanky, and now it's stronger than ever. Being an LOD build, it's a little harder to gear, but it's worth it. On to build number 8, another Crusader build, the Akon Condemn Crusader, which rises to A tier thanks to a buff to the Blade of Prophecy. And this is another classic Crusader build that has now returned to full glory. It's tanky, it deals great area damage. It does slow down against bosses, however. Not the best single target. On to number 7, a Barbarian build, Rhykker Boulder Toss. This build remains in S tier despite a significant nerf because, well, it's just so strong. Though it also benefits tremendously from soul shards, we should specify. This build is highly mobile, it's fast-paced, it's easy to gear, it offers an unusual barbarian playstyle, which might not be for everyone. You are charging into enemies, you are tossing spears at other enemies, it could be a little clunky. It's also on the squishier side. On to build number 6, the best Demon Hunter build of Season 30. The Natalia Spike Trap build, which rises from A tier thanks to benefiting greatly from the Altar of Rites. The Natalia set was reworked in Season 28 to become a Spike Trap build, giving it a very distinct playstyle. This is not, however, a beginner-friendly build. It takes skill to play this effectively, but the reward is huge damage explosions. For the easiest Demon Hunter build, I'd recommend Shadow Impale, but Natalia is significantly stronger than it. Alright, on to number 5, the best Witch Doctor build of Season 30. The Zunimasa Poison Dart build. Despite Zuni's getting a slight nerf, this build rises to S tier because it benefits tremendously from the altar, possibly more than any other build on this list. Zuni's is naturally squishy, and so the toughness you get from the altar really helps it out. But the biggest thing is that this build double dips on the altar's frenzied effect. You see, this is a pet build, and pet damage is calculated based on, partially, among other things, your attack speed. More attack speed on you does not make your pets attack faster, it just increases their damage. However, with this build, your pets attack only when you attack. So buffing your attack speed makes your pets attack faster, and just the bigger number on the attack speed means more damage. So you're double dipping, you're getting double the benefit of more attack speed. Then we add in the Dregs of Lies, Pet Soul Shard, and it's another big damage boost. Now, technically, on paper, this build should be able to clear a higher greater rift than any other build on this list. It technically would be the number 1 build, just by the metric of sheer pushing power. However, despite the buff it's getting from the altar, it's still a very squishy build at higher greater rifts. So when we're talking about what are the top 10 recommended builds for people to play, we cannot in good conscience say this super squishy build is the number 1 build we recommend. So because of that, we're bringing it down to number 5. But if you're up for the challenge, if all you care about is raw power, this is your number 1 build. So, on to build number 4, the best Crusader build of Season 30. Yep, that's 3 Crusader builds in our top 10 list here. It's a good season to be a Crusader. The Invoker Thorns build, which leaps up from the B tier thanks to benefiting possibly more than any other build in this game from the Soul Shards. Like we previously discussed, Thorns cannot normally crit, but the Remnant of Pain Soul Shard makes your attacks automatically crit enemies who are incapacitated. So now you're stacking a bunch of crit damage onto this build when you previously could not. And we will also have 5 skills constantly on cooldown, allowing the Sliver of Terror to stack even more attack speed and damage multipliers. And this build is all about spamming your attack as fast as possible to apply your Thorns damage. This build is super tanky, it has amazing single target damage, and is probably the easiest build to run in the top 10. That takes us to number 3, the top Barbarian build of Season 30, the Legacy of Dreams Hammer of the Ancient Barb. This build rises from A tier, it benefits tremendously from the Soul Shards. We have a bunch of cooldown skills that make the Sliver of Terror really strong, and the Essence of Anguish's spread Deathblow explosion synergizes really well with Ground Stomp, grouping up enemies, you bring down your hammer, once an enemy dies, the damage of that Deathblow explodes out onto other enemies, and since all enemies are grouped together, starts a chain reaction, just really strong. This build is tanky, it's easy to play, You're just Super Mario spamming your hammer down. Little tough to gear again because it's Legacy of Dreams. On to build number 2, the best wizard build in the game, the Legacy of Dreams Meteor Wizard, which remains in S tier despite a nerf to the Smoldering Core, and thus a nerf to all Meteor builds. Meteor builds were out of control powerful for a while. They've been reined in this season. There's still top builds. Every Meteor build still an S tier build. We got 3 flavors, the LOD as we said, plus Talrasha, plus Firebird. Talrasha Meteor will top the Talrasha leaderboards. It is, however, the weakest of the 3 Meteor builds because of a massive nerf to the Talrasha set. Still though, still S tier. The Firebird variant is going to top the Firebird leaderboards, and it's going to lag only slightly behind the LOD version, but it is considerably easier to gear for. And the Legacy of Dreams variant, of course, will be topping the no-set leaderboards for wizards. Now, it's possible that for all 3 of these builds now, the best variant is going to be the reverse Archon setup. This involves working Archon into the build, probably sacrificing teleport, and you're not actually doing anything in Archon other than stacking a bunch of damage buffs so that once you exit Archon, you have a bunch of damage buffs and can really bring down a powerful Arcane Meteor. The mechanics of this are complex, and again, the LOD version has high gearing requirements. But if you're willing to put in the time and effort to get good at this rotation, you are rewarded with one of the most powerful builds in the game. And that takes us to our number 1 build, the best Necromancer build, the Inarius Death Nova Necro. Yep, that's right, the buff to the Inarius set combined with a nerf to Trag'Oul means that Inarius is the number 1 most powerful build in the game and the most powerful variant of Death Nova as well. All Death Nova builds have been nerfed across the board because of a nerf to the Bloodtide Blade, but that doesn't stop this from being the best build in the game. All 3 variants of Death Nova are S tier. Inarius, Legacy of Dreams, and Trag'Oul. Trag'Oul lags behind Inarius only slightly in power, and Legacy of Dreams is actually about as powerful as Inarius, but it's significantly more difficult to gear for, so we give the number 1 spot to Inarius. Death Nova builds are tanky, they have tons of recovery, and they're easy to play. They just dominate. So that's our tier list and our top 10, but before we finish, we said we'd take a look at which class has the best starter set. So let's rank them in order from worst to best. Necromancer gets the Pestilence set. You basically have just one build to run with that. It's got a speedrun variant, but it's difficult to gear for, and it's just outclassed by all the other Necro sets. Necro, dead last place. Next, we got the Wizard with the DMO, the Delzier's Magnum Opus set. It's altogether a mediocre set. It gets bonus points over Pestilence for having 2 different builds you can run, either Twister or Frozen Orb, so depending on what items you find, you can build towards one or the other. Got some options there, but definitely one of the weaker starts, 6th place. 5th place goes to the Witch Doctor. You actually start with the Zunimasa set. Yes, you start off with the strongest Witch Doctor set in the game, but outside of Greater Rift pushing, it's just not really good at any other content. You need a ton of Paragon to really be effective. It's a trap, honestly. 4th place goes to the Crusader, which starts with the Akan set. You get to start with a set that's part of one of the strongest Crusader builds. It's also decent at speed content, so not the best start here, but definitely not the worst. 3rd place, it's a tough call, it's almost a tie. We're gonna give it to the Demon Hunter and its Marauder set. Marauder is easy to put together, it's easy to play, and it's decent to good at basically all content in the game. 2nd place goes to the Barbarian, which starts with the Rhykker set. Rhykker is decent to good in general farming, and of course it's excellent at GR pushing. Marauder is overall more versatile. It performs better in a better variety of situations, but thanks to the Visions of Enmity being permanently added into the game, you don't actually need to farm as many different things as much anymore, since the Visions just get you so many different rewards. But by far, the class that gets the best start is the Monk with the Inna set. It's an awesome build in so many different settings. It's easy to gear, it's easy to run, and it's the reason that I'm starting Monk in Season 30. No matter what activity you're partaking in, no matter what you're doing in the game, this is an A tier or an S tier build, especially at the speed content tends to be S tier. And now as we wrap up this video, we'll remind you that you can find this tier list on maxroll.gg for easy reference. That tier list will get updated in case of any surprises and testing in the meta, and you can also find their written guides and all the resources you can possibly need for Diablo 3. If you're looking for a repository of all my video guides for Diablo 3, you can find those on Rhykker.com. And before we end off here, sound off in the comments with what class and build you're looking to run in Season 30. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykker's Raiders for more Diablo content.